okay. Just want to give everybody a heads up so that way you are comfortable. All right, so just for those who are attending and are not familiar with Fusion Academy, one way or another that you guys got this lunch and learn, thank you for coming. Wanted to share a little bit about Fusion just for a second. We are a accredited private school, 6th through 12th grade, so middle school and high school. We are running all of our classes one-to-one. So it's one student, one teacher in the classroom setting. We also have our homework cafe where students do homework during their school day, but it's also their social time to hang out with their friends and just be adolescents. We are doing hybrid for the families who want to be in hybrid. We are also doing virtual for families who want to stay virtual. And we have campuses throughout Virginia, DC, and Maryland. So if you'd like to learn more about Fusion, please feel free to reach out to me after the event. Happy to talk to you about it. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you can please keep yourselves muted throughout the presentation, that would be really appreciated, so that way we don't interrupt the speaker. If you can rename yourself on your Zoom, that would be amazing. Just rename yourself to your first and last name. That way I know how to address you if you have any questions, and it also helps me a little bit when I'm taking attendance to see who came. The chat is going to remain open for collaboration throughout today's presentation. Feel free to share your resources, network with one another. You can definitely continue to utilize that space. The presenter will not be monitoring the chat. I will be, but if you have questions throughout, please feel free to pop them in. We might be stopping throughout the presentation to answer questions, but those questions that aren't answered throughout the presentation will be held at the end for Q&A. And I'll make sure to keep track of all those questions so that way you don't get lost. Also, feel free to private message me if you have any private questions. For the questions, just please keep in mind that this, again, is being recorded, and there's a lot of people in here today. We had about a little over than 100 registrations. So keep your questions appropriate and not too personal, because I know we have a lot of clinicians here and also parents. So we want to make sure that we are respecting one another in that way. So I'm going to kick it off by a little bit of an icebreaker, seeing who's here. I want you guys to utilize the chat. I want you to share a fun fact about you, what you do, and feel free to share your contact information if you want. So, fun fact about me is that I have a 4-year-old boy and an 18-month-old girl, and my son is obsessed with Batman to the point that in the beginning of COVID, he continued playing the Batman theme song on repeat over and over, that my little one, her first word was Batman. So my little fun fact. I would love for you guys to share your fun facts in the chat, and I actually want to read them out too. So feel free to drop that in. I'm not going to stop talking until I see people's fun facts and intros, and I'd love to know what you do, especially that way we can contact one another too. Come on, guys. It's a quiet group. Mia, social worker. Hi, nice to meet you. Anne. When I was a kid, we traveled around the States in a Volkswagen van. That's cool. There we go. Thanks, guys. Marcy, intervention coach at Roosevelt High School. Hi, Tom. Oh, I missed your fun fact. Oh, gosh, it scrolled right past me. Okay. Tammy, I'm home with my 10-year-old, 8-year-old, and 5-month-old baby. Bless your heart. Hi, Maurice. I'm mostly social shy person. Kathy, licensed clinical worker. I'm a ballet dancer. That is amazing. Our Rockville campus, we actually had a prima ballerina student who traveled for dance. So that's really cool. Parent of a potential student next year in Alexandria. So cool. Welcome, Jody. Figured out how to make mac and cheese. I think that said cupcakes before it scrolled. That's very cool. Hi, Jane. Welcome. Okay, guys, I appreciate you indulging me. sharing with me. Please keep dropping your fun facts. I think it's just really fun to learn about you guys and makes us all kind of know each other a little bit before we start. All right, so I'm going to do one more thing in the chat is I am going to drop a poll. So this is my first time doing this. You guys see the poll? Can I get like a thumbs up? Oh, you're answering. Yay. Okay. The poll question is, what is your familiarity with acceptance and commitment theory, which is abbreviated to ACT? So please go ahead and answer. That's just going to help us throughout the presentation a little bit. And while you are answering that, I am going to introduce today's speaker. So today's speaker is Dr. Aimee Caramico. Oh, I butchered that. Caramico, I'm so sorry, Aimee. She is a clinical psychologist and the director of training at Georgetown Psychology. Aimee has experience with utilizing ACT with adolescents and adults in private practice, community mental health, day program, and inpatient settings. So without further ado, I'm going to stop talking, especially since I messed up our speaker's last name, and pass it over to Aimee.
Hey, hi, everybody. Thank you, Olga, for the introduction and for inviting me here today. So I have been doing ACT for about a little over 10 years at this point. I kind of luckily stumbled upon it when I was in graduate school in Chicago and found that it connected with me on both a personal level and a professional level of like it seemed to fit with the clients that I wanted to work with. The understanding and kindness that is inherent to it is really what drew me to this kind of therapy. I felt like most modalities tend to fall into kind of pathologizing, while ACT recognizes the struggles that are inherent in living a full life. And especially that feels relevant this year as we've struggled with a lot of loss of control, very limited control, and much smaller lives than we're used to living. I think that sitting with our emotions and holding on to our values as much as we can in whatever ways possible really is more important than ever. So I felt like this talk might be particularly helpful today. We only have a short time. So hopefully at the end of that time, you can leave here with a better understanding of the basic foundations and concepts of ACT. And hopefully we also have some time to throw some practice in there because ACT is really a lot about experientials and role plays and that kind of stuff. So on that note, I'm going to share my screen with you guys and get started. Okay. So like Olga said, I work for Georgetown Psychology. I've been there for a few years and now I'm the director of training. So we take students from usually the Chicago school, but also from GW, doctoral students, and kind of help them along their training. And so I've been working with that. So what is ACT is a really basic question to answer. ACT is really a third wave therapy, which means that we kind of came from behaviorism, kind of shot past CBT, and now we're an acceptance and mindfulness-based behavior therapy. I would argue that we also tend to focus on emotions a lot, but that's not in the formal definition of our practice. What are we really trying to do in ACT? Is we're trying to help people to learn and grow as a result of our suffering and to kind of use that pain as a springboard into creating really rich and meaningful lives while accepting, like we said, creating a rich and meaningful life while accepting the pain that comes with it. We're not trying to reduce symptoms, but instead we're trying to change our relationship with them so that they're not going to be perceived as symptoms and more as like just part of human experience. They think about something like hallucinations. How a person responds to a hallucination may be more critical to their healthy functioning than the hallucination itself. I always think of The End of a Beautiful Mind when he just does like a quick reality test when somebody new comes up to talk to him. He like checks with the person next to him like, hey, do you see this person? And when they say yes, then he starts engaging with that person. He never got distressed during that whole process. He just kind of rolled with it. And that's what we want to do, like be able to roll with the experiences that we have, even if they can be distressing. We want to increase psychological flexibility. That's a term that you're going to hear a ton in ACT. And what does that really mean? It means the ability to be in the present moment with full awareness and openness to our experiences and to take action guided by our values. We just want to help people respond more effectively to the challenges that are going to come, again, with living a really full life. And we love our little acronyms here. So we are called ACT as the word, but if you want to break it down into the letters, we want to choose accepting, choosing a valued direction, and then taking action. And I'll make these slides available afterwards, so you guys don't have to be trying to take notes of all of these. So where did ACT come from? Like I said, we're behavior therapy. So we really have come from radical behaviorism. And radical behaviorism believes that everything an organism does, thinking, feeling, acting, counts as behavior. So our language becomes very important because we're looking not just at public language, speaking, gesturing, writing, all of that stuff, but also private language. Anything that's happening internally still counts as language. It's a cognition, thinking, planning, all of that stuff. And we believe that language can be good or bad. No thought or feeling is inherently problematic, dysfunctional, pathological, any of that. It's really what we do with it that makes that distinction. So we want to help people increase their awareness of their own behavior, including their thoughts, because thoughts are behavior in this, and to notice how it functions in their life. And so that brings us to functional contextualism, which is kind of the philosophy behind ACT. It's a very pragmatic approach. We don't care so much about the what of the behavior. We want to know what is the function of this behavior, kind of why is this behavior happening? To us, that's more important. So for an example, you can think of cutting. A lot of clients who self-injure. If you guys feel comfortable shouting out, like, what are some reasons that your clients might cut? You know, it's hard to speak of. Okay. Well, some options are.
Oh, there's one, control.
Control, yeah. I don't think you can see the chat, Olga, so if you don't mind reading it out, if people are adding.
Yeah, numb feelings.
Right. Okay. So yeah, right. For somebody does it for numbing their feelings, if they do it for control, if they're doing it for self-punishment, if they're doing it for attention, right? Those are all extremely different functions of the same behavior. And from this perspective, we're going to really look at each individual function. I'm going to treat that person differently based on why they're doing this behavior. So that's why the context and the function of the behavior is super important in ACT. Now the chat screen is in the middle of my slides. Okay. ACT is also based in relational frame theory, which is a very complicated, very research-heavy base of kind of the theory behind ACT. We don't need to know a lot about it. It's a little complicated. It even kind of goes over my head most of the time. So really short, it's just saying that we create frames all the time. We have one word that connects with another word and that becomes a frame. And our mind works in these constant frames and they become the core of our language and how we think. It's what allows us to learn without direct experience. And that can be helpful or it could be unhelpful. It's helpful in like we learn how to not touch a stove without ever having been burned. We learn that mostly through language. That's super helpful. But we can also make unhelpful frames. Like if we're growing up and our parents are constantly fighting and they're sometimes violent with each other, now we have a frame of marriage equals violent arguments. And that's kind of put together and that's gonna change how we do everything the rest of our lives. So we wanna kind of recognize how these frames are formed and recognize that sometimes we need to shift back from them. So where does ACT come from all of this? Russ Harris kind of talks about, like, we have the foundation of functional contextualism, then we've got kind of the first floor RFT kind of keeping us grounded, and then we've got ACT at the top floor. So ACT at the top floor is kind of taking all of this information and pulling it all together. And we want to recognize really the universality of human suffering. Most models tend to assume that humans are naturally psychologically healthy, and that those that aren't are abnormal. ACT kind of looks at it the opposite way. ACT kind of recognizes that all human beings suffer, that it's a part of living, and in fact, kind of necessary to live a valued life. If you're not suffering, if you're not experiencing any kind of pain, how much are you really putting yourself out there? How much are you experiencing vulnerability? How much are you experiencing love? Suffering isn't something that needs to be fixed. Instead, we kind of go with this assumption of destructive normality. We recognize that we have these ordinary processes that are happening constantly that can become destructive or dysfunctional. And so we believe that language has a really big role in this, and that's something that's a big part of the work that we do with our clients, is kind of diving into their language, including their internal language, but also their behavior. We also believe that the syndrome focus tends to lead us to develop treatment approaches that overemphasize symptom reduction and downplay like more functional and positive markers of health, like quality of life. And in ACT, we believe that's probably the most important thing that we can do, because symptom reduction isn't always possible. So I have a quote here to end up that's by Hayes, Stroessel, and Wilson, who are the founders of ACT. ACT is a relatively new therapy. It was the first randomized control trial was researched in 1986, and the first book came out in 1999. So like in the history of psychotherapy, that's pretty young. But it also allows us to like interact with these founders still. They're all very active in ACT and continuing to help us evolve. And so I have a quote here from them. It says, "The single most remarkable fact about human experience is how hard it is for humans to be happy." And then I have this little comic that I think just kind of sums up ACT really well. Like the perspective shift that we want to have. Though of course, from an ACT perspective, I want to change mental illness and just make that like anxiety or sadness or anger, instead of just like labeling it as a mental illness and then moving on. But that's a general perspective shift that we would like to happen. Instead of it having to be like this big scary thing, can it be just a part of our experience? Can we still live our lives even with it? So there are 6 core therapeutic processes in ACT, and we have them put into this little hexagon that we call the hexaflex. Just makes it visually stimulating, I guess. Let me move this for a second. Okay. So there are 6 areas, and we're going to go through all of them. Depending on time, we're going to do some exercises with a couple of them as well. But really, the 6 parts are having contact with the present moment. That one's all the way at the top. Having acceptance, diffusion, self as context, values, and committed action. Basically, what does all of this mean? To break it down into easier terms, it's about being here now, watching your thinking, opening up, becoming more aware, knowing what matters, and doing what it takes. So we've got on the left side, the left side is more our mindfulness and acceptance processes. Acceptance and diffusion are about being more open. And in the center, we have present moment and self as context, and those are to keep us more centered. That's why they're in the center. And then on the right side, we have more commitment and behavior change processes with values and committed action. And in the middle, we have that psychological flexibility. That is the main goal of all of this. We want to increase all of these 6 processes in order to increase that middle, that psychological flexibility. So we'll start with contact in the present moment, because that's kind of a big one with ACT. It's really about learning how to pay attention with flexibility, openness, and curiosity. We want to contact life outside of one's thoughts. One of the bigger workbooks that we have is called Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life, because a lot of us are living mostly internally. So mindfulness is about learning how to accept the current moment, even when it's uncomfortable, and engage fully in whatever we're doing. This helps to increase our effectiveness and our fulfillment. So the way that I talk about mindfulness, which is a synonym for contact with the present moment, mindfulness is like super buzzy right now. Everyone's talking about it. There's a million apps for it. There's a million different versions of it. There's Zen Buddhism. There's like just so many different ways. So how I describe mindfulness from an ACT perspective is really simply mindfulness is being present. A lot of the times we start thinking about the past, and that's when we tend to get depressed, or we start thinking about the future, and that's when we tend to get anxious. And our mind is usually pulling us one way or the other. And so mindfulness is a way to really get grounded in the current moment. Even if the moment totally sucks, it's also learning how to sit with that in a different way, as opposed to trying to fix it or trying to distract yourself or trying to avoid it, which is what we do a lot of the time. We also want people to be able to get better at slowing down and noticing their thoughts and feelings before engaging in problem behaviors. That's a big part of mindfulness. Can we slow down? Like, instead of saying like, well, I just lost my temper, I couldn't control it. Can we get them to recognize like all these small moments, all these different thoughts and feelings that happened before that moment when they lost their temper, and get them to interact with that in a different way? What's important to make the distinction is also that relaxation and symptom reduction is not the goal of mindfulness. Sometimes mindfulness is actively trying to make you uncomfortable, to kind of encourage you to approach it in a different way. Do you sometimes end up feeling more relaxed after doing a mindfulness? Yes, but that again is not necessarily our goal. That can just be a happy side effect. So what are ways that you can do contact with the present moment with clients or with yourself, really? I always start with a body scan. That's something that's not usually brand new to people, and it's similar to progressive muscle relaxation in that we're going through the different parts of your body. We're just not like punching and releasing them. And it just gives them something really simple and physical to focus on. With just like something like fingertips rubbing against each other, doing that really slowly sometimes just gives them something really simple and easy and new to kind of ground yourself with. But you can make a mindful activity out of anything. So with some of my clients who maybe skew more on the ADHD side and don't do well with eyes closed mindfulness exercises, I'm going to have them do something but paying attention to their 5 senses. So they could be mindfully walking, they could be mindfully eating. That's another one that we tend to not pay that much attention to that can be relaxing. Mindful showering. It could be literally anything you want. I had a client who liked doing the dishes, and so she would be mindfully doing the dishes and like really paying attention to the soap or the sponge or the scrub brush that she's using. If she has music on in the background while she's doing it, the way her body's moving, all of that. You can pay attention to your breath. And you can do more visual stuff like mindfulness of your hand, which is really just trying to like look at your hand and notice all of the different little lines and parts and little details. You can be really creative with it, really make anything you want, as long as you're noticing something, you're letting go of your thoughts as part of it, and you're letting your feelings be as they are. So what I'd like to do, if everyone consents, is to do a quick little mindfulness exercise, just a quick grounding. It shouldn't be more than 5 minutes. So if everyone's willing to just kind of find themselves in a comfortable space, feet flat on the floor usually is what we say, and you can close your eyes if you're comfortable, but if you're not, just try to focus on one spot in the room and keep your gaze focused on that so we're not so distracted by our environment. And when you do that, whether your eyes are closed or focused on one space, let's start with just a slow inhale. And I'm going to be asking questions as I go along, but they're not for you to answer out loud. They're just to help guide you. So let's start first with just breathing into your nose, letting your chest and your lungs and your belly fill up as much as they can. And then exhale and release all of that. And once again, as much as you can, fill up your lungs and your chest and your belly with air. And then exhale until you can't exhale anymore. And let's just do that one more time. And then I want you to fall into the natural rhythm of your breath. And just notice the way it moves in your body naturally. Try to almost see that your breath is breathing you, not the other way around. And then I want you to start to notice different parts of your body. So let's start with noticing, where are my feet? Notice if you can feel the weight of them on the floor or in your shoes. Where are your hands? Again, feeling the weight of them resting against whatever they're touching. Maybe you can even feel the pulse in your fingertips. Where is your head? Where is your heart? Can you feel that in your body? And can we ask, where am I right now? Trying to feel yourself in the space that you're in. Trying to have a sense of where you are in relation to everything else in the room, or to where I'm resting. Even having a sense of where the door or the ceiling is. Just really feeling yourself in this space, in this very moment, exactly as it is. And then with your eyes still closed or focused on that one point, I'd like you to come back to your breath. Start to take in the sounds around you. Feeling yourself in your seat. Almost trying to see if we can imagine that feeling of gravity holding us down and onto our chairs today, stopping us from floating all around the room. And then let's take one more slow, deep breath together. And then you can open your eyes when you're ready. And if anybody feels comfortable sharing what that experience was like, that would be welcome. What kind of things you noticed? What was hard?
There's some coming in through the chat.
Okay.
Claire said it was hard keeping my thoughts from going all over. Nancy, so relaxing, emptying the stress.
Yeah. I mean, what is hard about mindfulness, and I think what people get confused about mindfulness is like the goal of mindfulness is not to have zero thoughts. That is never going to happen. Our minds move way too fast for that. And so the goal of mindfulness is more about trying to notice when you're getting distracted and bringing yourself back. Even if you're doing that constantly, you're still being mindful. So even when your mind goes for those Girl Scout cookies or what you have to do later, okay, great, come back. I don't want you to forget the Girl Scout cookies, that's important. But I also want you to just keep coming back as much as you can. And so we can be really gentle with it. I've been doing this for, like I said, over 10 years. And there are some days when I try to do mindfulness that it's just not going to happen. And that's okay. So mindfulness for therapists is something I like to talk about. This is not just for our clients to practice, this is for us to practice. And it's important for us to notice at what times do I tend to lose contact with the present in therapy sessions? How might these moments be affecting my clients? When my clients are particularly lacking with present moment, can we slow down, let go of the content of what they're saying, and focus on their pace, on their pitch, on what their bodies are telling us, on their posture, on their eye contact. And then can we gently redirect them? Where are you right now? Where were you? You know, mindfulness doesn't always have to be eyes closed. It can be that gentle redirect that we want to do with ourselves in the room with the client. We also want to own up to when we get lost ourselves and try to redirect. ACT is a little unique for me in terms of we are not trying to be experts here as therapists. We are owning our own stuff. There is a metaphor in ACT that kind of describes the therapeutic relationship, and it's called the two mountains metaphor. And basically they're saying, like, we're both on our own mountains, making our own climb. I'm struggling with the same things that you are. I'm not like way above watching you below me and shouting out instructions. I'm going through the same things that you are. I can just see yours better because I'm on this mountain here and you're on this mountain here. I can look over and see your obstacles and I can help you with those. You might even be able to see mine because of perspective, right? So it's just about us going through our own stuff at the same time. And sometimes it's really powerful for our clients to hear us say, like, I'm really sorry just now. I got really lost in my own thoughts and I'm gonna need us to go back. I missed what you were saying and I feel like it was really important because we just took ownership of our own inability to be mindful sometimes. So the next one on there is cognitive diffusion. It's kind of our little made up word. And basically it means learning how to step back and separate from our thoughts, our images, and our memories, instead of allowing them to dictate our mood or our behavior. So the flip side of diffusion is fusion. That's when we're fused to our thoughts. When we take our thoughts to be reality, to be truth, sometimes they're even orders or threats. They can be really intense. This is a word that I don't tend to use with my clients. I don't tend to use fusion or diffusion. I tend to talk about getting hooked, getting stuck, getting lost. I think those are much more digestible ways to talk about it with my clients. And what we want to do is kind of step away from this narrative of our thoughts are important and recognize that they're simply words, no more and no less. We want to normalize them. There's no such thing as an abnormal thought. Every thought that we have is normal because we're having it. Right? And we want to step back from this idea of true and false. And we want to instead look at the workability of our thoughts. Is this helping you or is this not helping you? So workability is really important in every intervention and ACT. Basically, we want to look at, is what you're doing working to make your life rich, full, and meaningful? Is that thought working for you? Is the thought of, I fail at everything, helping? Maybe somehow that thought is pushing you to be super motivated and like really push yourself. And then, okay, if it's working, it's working. But most of the time that thought paralyzes us. That thought stops us from putting ourselves out there. And so it's not helpful. And so there's this term in ACT called creative hopelessness, where we kind of almost want to create a sense of hopelessness in them to get them to recognize that what they have tried isn't working. We want them to see the costs that have come from trying it this way. And we want them to be able to then be open to trying a different way. And we want to do this non-judgmentally and compassionately. We don't want to say like, hey, what you're doing is wrong, it's not working, try something else. We want to help them get there on their own, and we want to kind of be a loving support as they get there. So we think about the difference here again between like maybe ACT and like traditional CBT. So if a client comes to me and says, you know, I was thinking my sister really hates me. From a traditional CBT perspective, we're going to go into like, well, what's the evidence for that thought? And what's the evidence against that thought? From an ACT perspective, we're more interested in what was happening when you had that thought. What did you feel when you had that thought? You got really lost in that thought. Is it happening now too? Or like, how did that thought then impact your behavior and your even relationship with your sister after that? Because you're going to interact with her differently now. I mean, we're more interested in all of that rather than the content, rather than the story. So examples of diffusion. A lot of different ways to do this. Sometimes verbally helps. So with some of my clients, we have a thought, like a really heavy one, like I'm not good enough. That's pretty universal for the most part. We say it like it's a fact. We say, I'm not good enough, we believe that, and we move on. Instead, what if we even just built in like a little bit of verbal distance? And we said, I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough. Even though it might seem kind of silly, what we've already done is create a little bit of distance. We've already labeled it as just a thought. And maybe it feels a little less heavy than usual. It feels a little less like a sentencing, if you will. For my kiddos, I think it's helpful to do silly voices. If they can do that, that's great. I had a client who did a wonderful SpongeBob impression, and it's really hard to take I'm not good enough seriously when SpongeBob is telling you that. And we can have like a little bit of humor with it. Humor is super helpful in ACT to be able to kind of have some levity to things that we usually hold really tightly and really heavily. There's a checklist. What that basically means is sometimes with my clients, if I hear them saying the same kind of thoughts over and over again and they're not catching it, is I'll have them write them out as we're talking. And then every time I notice it or they notice it, we have to stop and they have to put a check mark next to it happening again. So usually what happens by like the end of even just doing this for 10 minutes in a session is they're either laughing of like, oh, this is ridiculous. I can't believe I've like said this or had this thought like 3 or 4 times. Or they're able to see like, wow, I do this a lot. This is not helping, right? And either way is useful for us because they've again taken a step back instead of just going down the rabbit hole with it. Leaves on a Stream is a really popular eyes closed exercise that was originally by John Kabat-Zinn. That's probably what I do with most of my clients to start off the diffusion conversation. If we had time, I would have us do that one as well, but we've got a bunch of other things to go through. But basically what we're doing with Leaves on a Stream is we're imagining ourselves in a field, watching these leaves from a tree fall into the stream and then float away. And we're trying to imagine our thoughts on those leaves. What we're doing in that exercise is we are creating physical distance. We're watching this happen against this tree, and we're just letting our thoughts happen. We're not interacting with them. We're not pushing them away. We're not holding on to them. We're not arguing. We're just letting it happen. Metaphors are also super helpful in ACT. Metaphors and experientials are like the biggest part of what I want to do with my clients. What's important with all of these is that we're not just talking about it, we're also doing it. So I like to kind of be collaborative with the metaphors. One of my clients, as we were talking about this, kind of related it to online trolls. She was like, yeah, it's like when you read the comments section and like these trolls are just coming for somebody. You don't interact with them because they're never going to stop. They will keep going until the end of time. Right? So that's how she was able to see her thoughts. It's like sometimes they're just trolls and it's better to not engage with them. So you can like let them kind of come up with it on their own, and that's generally more engaging. Sometimes it helps to name the mind. I kind of call our thoughts chatter sometimes, or just to do some general labeling of like, this is a worry or a judgment or a plan, or, you know, just to kind of help them see the difference. We also want to work on like recognizing the difference between thoughts and feelings. A lot of the times when I ask people like, how are you feeling? Well, they'll say like, I feel like a failure. That's not a feeling. That's a thought that you have made into a feeling. What is the thought? What is the feeling underneath that? Right? You have a thought, I am a failure, and then you feel a certain type of way. That's what I want to know more about. Does that make you feel anxious? Does that make you feel sad or hopeless? Does it make you angry? I want to know, what is your emotional reaction to that? And can we dive into that a little bit more? We want to be careful here again of invalidating our clients. We want to help them understand that their thoughts are coming out of fear or sadness, and the emotions need room. We kind of want to step out of our thoughts and into those feelings a little bit more. An exercise that I think is also nice to do, more for probably depending on the client, but I like to do it with my fellow therapists and different ACT workshops, is an index card exercise where we have to write out all of our thoughts that get really sticky and kind of hold them in front of us and end up sharing them with the group. And I think there's a lot of vulnerability with that sometimes allows for a lot more compassion for everyone else in the group, that hopefully then we can kind of turn inwards and have a little bit more patience and kindness for how harsh we're being with ourselves. Again, one that I wish we had time for, but got a lot more to cover, so we'll see. So next is acceptance. Obviously a big one since it's in the name of the kind of therapy this is, but we want to open up and make room for painful feelings, sensations, urges, and emotions. We want to allow for the world and people in it to be unpleasant, not as we wish, and upsetting without fighting, resisting, running, or trying to control. A lot of people get acceptance confused with giving up. It is not the same thing at all. It is not a passive process. It is an active choice that we are making while still trying to improve our lives as much as possible. It can be a values-based choice to accept our current situation. And I think self-compassion fits in here very well. Self-compassion is not in the hexaflex, but it's very much a big, huge piece of ACT. And it's not just self-compassion in terms of being nice to ourselves, it's also having compassion for our emotions. We tend to be really judgmental of our emotions, especially the ones that we label as bad, like anxiety, sadness, anger. We tend to say, I can't have those. I don't like those, right? And what tends to happen is that usually makes them more intense. So what we want to be able to do is accept pain in the service of something meaningful and life-enhancing. We think about right now, we think about how small our lives have been for the last 10 months. Why are we doing this? Why have we chosen to live this way? We are choosing to live this way because we care about other people, and we care about our health and safety and our families' health and safety, and we care about moving on to a healthier future. Right? If we remember the underlying values in something, it's easier to choose to accept something. The opposite of acceptance is what you're going to see in clients most of the time, and in yourself pretty much constantly, is experiential avoidance. It's us trying to avoid, get rid of, suppress, or escape our own private experiences. The problem is, the more time and energy we put into that, the more we're likely to suffer in the long run, because it doesn't work. It works for maybe little short windows, but then we're constantly trying to outrun something that can't be outrun. And we always feel like we're, in Indiana Jones getting chased by that boulder, except that scene doesn't end. It just continues on and on. Instead, if I truly accept my feelings, then even if they're uncomfortable, I'm not distressed by them. I think it's important to talk about, too, tolerance versus acceptance. Tolerating to me just sounds like it takes so much more energy. It's harder to stay engaged when you're tolerating something. You're missing out on the pleasure in it. It raises anxiety about future events. That's how we end up, I think, developing anxiety about anxiety, like where insomnia or panic disorder tends to come from. Instead, we want to focus on, again, that active choice to accept something, even if we don't like it. We want to try to undermine our agenda of control, recognizing that trying to control our thoughts and feelings is not helping. Our lives start shrinking when we do that. Our ability to enjoy things dissipates when we do that. So the other side of this is willingness and acceptance, and accepting with kindness. That's really important to help anything with kindness. So basically, anytime I'm talking to my client and they're telling me something, I want them to almost verbally or imagine adding in, and it's okay. And that's what acceptance is about. Like, I feel really angry right now, and it's okay. I really don't want this, and it's okay. I'm going to be okay. So this is a nice little description of the two differences between how we can run from or embrace pain. And there's a quote by Russ Harris next to it. When we accept our feelings, they may or may not reduce in intensity. We can't predict it, but we can predict this. When we try to control or avoid our feelings, it's very likely that they'll increase in intensity and cause us more distress. So what we want to try to do is more on the bottom. Can we embrace that pain? Can we recognize that maybe it needs some attention and some comfort and some kindness? And then can we carry it with us? Almost like in our pockets or on our shoulder. There's also a nice verbal exercise from Kelly Wilson, one of the founders of ACT, and it's the choice to feel. And we've got two options, and he makes them extreme just to kind of illustrate it. Option A, you never have to feel this painful feeling ever again, but it means you lose all capacity to love and care. You care about nothing and no one. Nothing matters. No one matters. Life becomes meaningless because you don't care about anything. Option B, you get to love and care. People matter to you. Life matters. You care about what you do and what happens. You care about friends and family. You get to build loving relationship. Life becomes meaningful. And when there's a gap between what you want and what you've got, painful feelings like this one will show up. And some people will choose option A, and that's okay. We don't have to force them to option B right away. It's our job to kind of help them get to that point where they can see option B as viable. And I have a nice little screenshot from South Park of all the shows in the world that kind of illustrates how pain and living a full life can fit together in a really meaningful way. And it's basically showing if we're going to love and care, then we're going to feel pain. And can that make it worth it? Right? He's sad because of this breakup, but it also made him realize that he's human, that he's alive, that he cared that much. in the first place. So examples of acceptance. It can be an eyes closed mindfulness. So sometimes what I'm doing with clients is like just having them close their eyes and sit with this feeling as it happens in session. And we're essentially trying to ride the wave. The wave is a really powerful metaphor in ACT because that's how we see our feelings, always kind of coming and going and never like completely still waters. There's always a little bit of movement. But there can also be, again, I don't want us to just be talking about this. I want us to be doing it in session. So sometimes we have visual aids, especially again with the young kids, like Chinese handcuffs, if anybody remembers those little like the paper things that you put your fingers in. And the more and more you try to pull, the more stuck you get. That's a good illustration for us because it shows there's no healthy way to get out of life. And any attempt to do so just restricts the room you have to move. The only way to get out of that, Chinese handcuff, is to push in, is to push your finger in and give us like a little bit more room to breathe. That's all we're trying to do. Give ourselves more room to breathe. There's also urge surfing, which is similar to that riding the wave. So people who cut or people who drink, we're kind of noticing what that urge to do that feels like in your body and what it's like to sit with that without engaging in it. It can be really hard, but also really helpful. There's a self-talk, like I was talking about, adding "and it's okay" to everything. I don't like this feeling, but I have room for it. It's unpleasant and I can accept it. I don't like it, I don't want it, I don't approve of it, and right here and now, I can allow it. I think metaphors are also really helpful with ACT. So another thing that you can kind of act out with your kids, even with adult clients too, though, is a tug of war that you can describe it, or you can actually do it if you have like a blanket or a jacket. I've done it before in sessions with, where you're holding one end and they're holding the other, and I'm going to be their emotion, whatever it is that they're trying to avoid. And in between us is a bottomless pit. The harder I pull, the harder you pull, and we just keep getting closer and closer to the edge, but nobody's winning. And we can kind of laugh about this. We can kind of notice what's happening physically in the room when you're doing this. What happens instead if you just drop the rope and you guys just exist on either side of this pit? There's also the polygraph metaphor, which is kind of showing the hopelessness of this kind of stuff. So it's essentially like, let's hook you up to a polygraph. And this polygraph is going to measure anxiety. Anytime you feel the slightest bit of anxiety, it's going to start bouncing around. So right now in this moment, I don't want you to feel anxious at all. Stop it. And let's watch the polygraph and see what happens. What do we think is going to happen? It's going to go nuts, even more so than before, because now you're under this pressure of like, don't do it, don't do it. Right? It's not helpful. So we can kind of recognize what avoidance is doing to us, or this like attempt to control. There's also physicalizing, which I think is a really helpful exercise, which is being able to like take the emotion or the feeling or the urge or whatever it is in your body, take it outside of your body and try to imagine being able to look at it in the world around you. What would it look like? What shape would it be? What color would it be? What size would it be? What would it feel like in your hands? What weight or temperature would it have? And then once you really looked at this, try to imagine like bringing it back to your body, putting it back where you found it. And sometimes the next step to that is imagining it kind of bursting. And instead of being just in one heavy area, kind of like filling you up in little pieces all the way from the top of your head to the bottom of your feet. Just making it like another part of our experience instead of something really heavy and intense. Self as context is probably the most confusing of all the aspects of the hexaflex. Another set where like my clients do not know the words for this and they don't need to know the words for this. We will go over it briefly, but like you also don't need to fully understand it. Self as content is basically saying that there's a thinking self and there's an observing self. Self as content is our thinking self. It's our self-description. It's who we are, all our beliefs, thoughts, ideas, facts, images. It's our story. Right? Self as content means I am the sum of my story. And that definitely has its uses. It helps us hold on to memories, our loved ones. It helps us learn from behaviors. It helps us remember how to do things, right? We only want to intervene with that when it becomes problematic, when we become really fused to something, or when it's taking us away from our values. And then there's self as context, which is our observer self. And we want to recognize that we are there no matter what. There is a constant self underneath everything. So from birth, our bodies, our thoughts, our feelings, our roles all change. But the you that's been able to notice all of that change has been there the whole time. You are the same person you were from when you were born to now. Just all these external things have changed. And then there's self as process, which is kind of a mindfulness process. It's what we're doing in the here and now. So what does this really mean for clients? I think of it as perspective taking a good amount of the time, being able to step outside of like these narrow windows in which we see ourselves. I think metaphors are really helpful here. The main one that I use is probably the sky versus the weather. So just acknowledging that we are the sky and there's weather happening inside it and around it. That's our thoughts and our feelings. It could be hailing, it could be thunderstorms, it could be pitch black. But remember that no matter how bad the weather gets, the sky is not damaged. Even if you can't see it, it's still there. And that's who we are underneath everything. There's also the chessboard metaphor, which kind of imagines us as a chess player. And we have our good thoughts versus our bad thoughts on this board, and we're trying to like take them off. But as we do that, pieces keep getting added on, and it's just like never ending. You're never going to run out of pieces. Instead of being one of the players, can we be the chessboard? Can we notice all of this stuff happening, the good and the bad, without doing anything with them? To kind of use a more recent reference, when I was watching The Queen's Gambit, that was something that came to mind. She would look up at the ceiling and see the whole game as opposed to just being a player. And that gave her the insight to kind of see the entire picture kind of without getting roped into anything. And then she had a better perspective moving forward. More practical applications is sometimes looking at when we're really fused to something, like the idea of being right. When we're having an argument with somebody, like, well, I'm right, and this is important because I'm correct in this assumption. Is it more important for you to be right or to have this relationship? Because sometimes it's important to remember that there is no right or wrong. It's about perspective. It's about how everyone is perceiving the situation. And can we understand their side, even if we don't agree? And vice versa. And there's also forgiveness, right? If we can identify a painful experience, we want to look at what would it mean to forgive this offender, not for them, but for you. What would your life look like if you let go of this experience, and how it colors your present moment and your future? Right? It gives us an ability to step back from some of the stuff that we have become really fused with. Okay. Next is values. Easier to understand for sure. It's basically, what do we want to stand for? How do we want to behave on an ongoing basis? What direction do we want our life to go in? There's a difference here between values and goals. Goals are finite. You can achieve them and then that's it. Right? So goals is like, I'm going to walk 3 blocks today. Done. A value is more like heading north. You can always go more north. You're never going to hit an end to that. So we want to make sure that we're helping our clients identify values. So somebody tells me their value is getting married. That's a finite goal. Maybe their value is being loving or monogamy or commitment. I want to help them identify what's the underlying value in that. Why is that important? Somebody wants to go to the gym, but why? Is it important for you to be healthy? Is that a good mindfulness activity? Is it a good community activity based on what kind of exercises you're doing? We want to get underneath it and look at something a little bit deeper. Because the problem is, once you achieve a goal, it's no longer a goal, and we're always moving, and that can lead to frustration. We're always looking to the future, what's next, and we're never appreciating having approached something or achieved something, or like living in line with our values. We want these to be held lightly. When we fuse with our values, they become rigid rules instead of flexible guides. And we really want our values to be something that changes over time. Our values now versus 10 years from now are probably going to be different, and that's okay. We're going to keep maturing and changing, and things are going to ebb and flow in terms of their importance to us. It's useful for motivation. It helps us to set goals and action plans, facilitate acceptance, and add enrichment and fulfillment to life. So we have to recognize that sometimes we need to prioritize our values also based on our current circumstances. So somebody who says, like, family is super important to me, so I want to love my parents, but those parents are abusive. So then we have to decide, is it more important for you to love your family and your parents, or is it more important for you to have a sense of safety and self-protection? And sometimes we're going to have to sacrifice one goal for the other, and we have to kind of help people navigate that. So there's a lot of different values exercises that you can do, and I'm going to pull up most of these so that you can see them visually. There's values cards, which I tend to use the most. There's the what was originally the funeral exercise, but I can get a little dark, so I tend to go 80th birthday. And on that one, you're just imagining that you're at your 80th birthday and your family and your friends and your loved ones are speaking about you. What do you want them to have said about your life? What do you want them to be celebrating about you? There's the bullseye and the life compass and the values assessment worksheet. What we want to watch for with all this stuff is we want to watch for a focus on pleasing others. We want to help people reset from that. So let's say, like, oh, I just want everyone else to be happy. Then can we say, all right, once everyone is happy, then what do you want to do with your life? We want to watch when the goal is to change other people. We want to get into that deeper again. Say, okay, so let's say this person changed. Again, what would you like to develop or bring to that relationship? We want it to be about them. And we also want to watch values that are based on should. You're like, well, I should care about this. I don't, like, we're going to step away from that judgment and focus on, like, what is actually important to you in this moment. We also really want to keep cultural sensitivity in mind here, recognizing that every culture has different values, and we are not here to impose ours on anybody else's. We might completely disagree with the list they came up with. It doesn't matter. It's theirs and it's valid. So this is a bad screenshot of a values card sort because I'm not that technologically savvy, but you can get the idea that there's like about 80 or so of these values, and you're going to sort them into those 3 piles with the client or with yourself. I like to do this exercise every couple of years and just kind of see what's changed. And we want to look at how important each of these values is and how much are you living it right now. So kind of Kelly Wilson mentioned, in that gap between what we want and where we are is suffering. And that's why we're looking at this. Like, if acceptance is super important to me and I'm only living it like 5 out of 10, of course I'm going to feel discomfort. And of course I'm going to feel pain in that gap. So what our goal then is to help them figure out, how do we start bridging that gap a little bit at a time. Another way to do this is our bullseye exercise, and it kind of just breaks it down into these main 4 quadrants. And it helps you, again, put it like, where is my life just as I want it to be, and my life is far from how I want it to be. And you want to do this in each of the quadrants and get a sense of how fulfilled you're feeling in terms of your values. Another way to do it is the life compass. This one gives us a little bit more room than the bullseye to like explore, gives us a little bit wider of an area. And then in that centerpiece, you can write a few words about what's important to you or meaningful to you about this domain in your life. In the upper square, you're going to mark it, how important are these values to me? And in the lower small square, you're going to mark it on how effectively you're living these values right now. And that, again, gives us a little bit of a chance to see that gap. And what does it tell us about what's important in our lives and what we're currently neglecting? The last part is committed action, which is basically what it sounds like. It's taking effective action guided by our values. It's living by our values, even if that brings up discomfort. And committed action includes pretty much anything. Any traditional behavioral intervention, exposure, skills training, so like time management, assertiveness, problem solving, self-soothing, crisis coping, all of that, behavioral activation, pharmacotherapy, all falls under committed action, as long as it's living towards your values. And because we can't stop with our acronyms, we want our goals to be specific, meaningful, adaptive, realistic, and time-framed. So this is an exercise that I'd like us to do. It's going to be real fast. If anybody has pen and paper, that would be great. I tried to make it, again, not very technologically savvy, but this is generally what it looks like when I do it in person. It looks like a mess, and I like it to look like a mess because I think that's important. And basically what we're going to do with those 6 areas, if you have a pen and paper, is for us to think about right now, what are the things that we used to get fulfillment out of? Maybe before quarantine or before like the last couple of months of this quarantine when we're probably all at our limits. And it doesn't have to be big stuff. So I'll kind of give mine as an example. I would put bigger ones like friends and family. I would put traveling, concerts, and then it could be small ones like reading or exercise. And however big or small you want them to be, but there's these 6 different quadrants. And so I would ask everybody to write those out and normally share, but I want to have time for questions, so we won't be able to do that. So I'll just kind of share mine. And then what I'm going to do with clients after they have this piece of paper is I'm going to have them rip off the pieces of that aren't present anymore. So for me, obviously traveling. So I'm going to rip off that piece, but hold on to it. I'm going to rip off concerts. And I'm going to rip off friends. So this is what I'm left with. And sometimes I think this by itself is a good thing for clients to see, because some of my clients are left with nothing except this middle cloud. And so I want to sit with that for a second. I want to sit with what is it like emotionally to see that you've lost so much of this stuff. Right? I think that's important for them to be able to sit with. And then what I want to do with these pieces I've ripped off is flip them over and come up with one thing that they can commit to doing over this next week to help them get that back in their life, just a tiny bit. So for friends, something that I'm going to write is like, hey, I didn't answer Sarah's text message from 2 days ago. I keep forgetting to do that. So all I'm going to write is text Sarah back. For traveling, maybe on the flip side of that, I'm going to write, go on a hike in a new location. It doesn't have to be traveling the world. It could even be like, I'm going to go to a new neighborhood and walk around for a little bit. Something really small and manageable. Concerts a little trickier. So maybe it's just, trying to see what I can stream online. You're not going to pick all of these for 1 week, but it's something that I'd like you guys to think about to help us get more engaged in our life. Is like, what are these areas that I can commit to working on this week, and how can I start to do that? And then what I'm going to have the client do is we're going to tape it all back together to this thing. And I want them to tape it in a way that doesn't fit. I don't want it to go exactly where it used to go. I want it to be like a Frankenstein version of what it used to be, but show that that is still better than what it used to be, with missing those spaces altogether. Right? There's no getting back to exactly the way it used to be, but this is still really worthwhile. And that can help them get moving on some committed action. And those goals can keep getting updated every session, even if you want to. Okay. So the next question is really, how do I guide my treatment with ACT? I think the hardest part about ACT in the beginning is learning how to pick up on all of this happening in the room, because a lot of it is happening all at once. This is not a linear model. These things are happening simultaneously a lot of the time. So what we want to get better is noticing is like, okay, can the client stay centered? Are they worried? Are they ruminating? Are they distracted? Are they inattentive? Can they take others' perspectives? Can they stay open? How much is fusion and avoidance running their lives? When and where is avoided content worse? I think about like a divorced parent seeing their kids in a totally different context. That might be really sad for them to like, oh, now I only see my kids every other weekend and we're in a different house than we used to be. And so that makes them uncomfortable, and they might even start dreading that time because it's so much heaviness. And so we want to look at what's triggering this stuff. How can we impact it a little differently? To what extent are they stuck in their thoughts, and can they engage in their life? For the extent are they stuck in their thoughts, you want to look at, are they comparing, evaluating? Are they like really complex and busy and confusing in their speech? Are they adversarial? Are they justifying? Are they perseverating? And we want to look at these common barriers to action, like impulsivity, immobility, and persistent avoidance. And we want to figure out kind of what seems the most relevant per session. So I don't go into my sessions with the goal of like, today we're going to talk about diffusion. I'm going to listen to what they're coming in with, and I'm going to ask myself these questions and then choose my intervention based on that. So that's what I think is the trickiest part, is like knowing these well enough to be able to make them happen in the moment in session and choose to slow them down and stick with it. Obviously, not something that happens after a 1 hour talk, but I love talking about this stuff, so always reach out. So I'm going to bring us back to the hexaflex to kind of wrap up. Like I said, this stuff is happening all the time, and there's no right or wrong way to go about it with clients. For me personally, I tend to start with present moment and go counterclockwise to like acceptance and diffusion with my anxious folks. I think that's more helpful generally. So like for my anxious folks, I want to help slow them down. I want to get them to step back from their thoughts, and I want to have them work on accepting that feeling kind of right off the bat. But with my depressed folks, I tend to go with values and committed action to just get them moving first, because we're not going to be able to do the deeper work if they're not able to get out of bed. So we need the values and committed action to do that. So that's, again, just me personally. Okay, so that was a lot. That was a real quick introduction into ACT. And again, I'm open to any questions or comments right now. I want to leave space for that. I'm also going to leave this up here with my info. That's the email that I answer the most regularly. I have a Georgetown Psychology email too. If you prefer that one, I can send that out. But I don't check that outside of the work week. Again, I love talking about this. Ask me questions. Have conversations about it afterwards. If you want information on further trainings, I can provide you with that. There's a ton of really cool stuff coming up. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for listening. And I'll throw it back to Olga.
Thank you, Dr. Aimee Caramico. Really appreciate it. I also made sure I got your last name right this time. Sorry about earlier. But I'm going to open it up for Q&A. I haven't seen any questions come through the chat yet. So if you have a question, feel free to shout it out, or you can write it in the chat, and I'm happy to ask on your behalf. So open up for a few minutes. Would love to hear more about recommended trainings.
Yeah, so if you guys, I can maybe put it in the chat just so that's easier. If you wanted to join the Mid-Atlantic ACBS chapter, ACBS is the Association of Contextual Behavioral Sciences, and that's where ACT is focused. There's a very active chapter. Their website is old and does not look up to date, but they do a listserv, and there's a bunch of great trainings on there. So there's one with Miranda Morris and Sean Costello-Woolley that's going to be in February, and that's a deep dive into ACT. I think that's a 4-week Friday training. And there's also ones coming up that are more into like the other parts of contextual behavioral. There's one called functional analytic psychotherapy, which we didn't talk about, but it's kind of a fusion between psychodynamic and ACT work. So there's a lot of great trainings there. I can find out the specifics and email them to Olga, and maybe she can pass them along to everybody if anyone's interested in attending them.
Yeah, that would be great. I'm going to send everybody a link to the recording, your PowerPoint presentation, and anything else you want me to share. I'm happy to include that in the email to everyone.
Okay, so I can put links to those trainings in there.
The next question is from Laurel. Is ACT an evidence-based model for kids, teens, as well as adults?
Yes, it does. I with the kiddos as much, but there is a lot of work, and it's I think it's very easily adaptable because of the experientials, because of like the how interactive it can be. So it's just going to include a lot more of like role playing and like using your hands and kind of getting in there. But it is definitely evidence-based for kids and teens as well.
Great question. All right, we have time for just a few more questions if anybody wants to ask. This is the moment where I'm letting you guys go off mute if you want to.
Yeah, okay.
All right,
So
there's a question. Can you state again where you start based on anxiety versus depression?
yeah, so with my anxious clients, I do tend to start present moment all the way at the top and kind of go around fusion and acceptance. I think those are the main three. And then with depressed folks, I tend to go more values and committed action as a good base to get started with. Again, just a personal thing. So there's a million different ways for everyone to do it.
Okay. All right. Thank you for sharing. Great question too. I think that's it for Q&A. If you guys think of any more questions, feel free to email me or Dr. Caramico if you want to ask those questions. I will share her contact information. Otherwise, hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I look forward to seeing you at a future Lunch and Learn event.
I did have a quick question. I was wondering, is she actively taking clients now?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And then do you see children as well as adults, or just children and teens?
I usually see a 16 and up. But again, the Mid-Atlantic ACBS is a great resource for referrals too. If you're looking for that, you can send out messages to everyone and see who has openings.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
All right, thanks everyone. Take care.
Thank you.